he withheld his energy, and he withheld his expertise, and eventually ended up sabotaging the goals of the team.
Like, it's going to cost the company millions. Welcome to Not Playing Along. This is a podcast about cultural and corporate dysfunction. The stories in this podcast can cost people their careers, so the guests are always anonymous and characters' names have been changed. But the behaviors we hate or make fun of at work or in Western culture are just people doing exactly what the system rewards. We expect people to act well, but we rarely design the conditions that make those behaviors safe or even worthwhile. This podcast is about seeing those forces, and it's about redesigning them, because we are refusing to pretend all this is normal, and we are not playing along. Hello, and welcome to one of our founding episodes. I am Adri Delore. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when companies fail to price behavior. What this episode is about is how rational people adapt to poorly designed behavioral systems. Why today's corporate ways and even HR can't stop dysfunctional behavior at work, and what would change it all for the better overnight. Me and my guest today, we actually worked together for some period of time, and I think that every listener will be able to relate to the characters that we're going to talk about today. We have the withholder, someone who blatantly refuses to contribute their expertise, leaving you stranded at critical moments. We've got the toxic nice one, someone who gets away with not contributing at all, just by being super likable. And we've got the schoolyard bully, someone who wants to be in charge so much that at times people are physically afraid of him. Most of us, I think these characters are just jerks, but they're actually behaving exactly as expected, exactly as the systems that we built inside corporations and in our culture encourage them to. And company leaders, HR, don't really care to stop this behavior. Their focus is, are we meeting short-term goals? And are we at risk of being sued? But I think the uncomfortable truth for them is this. Dear company leaders, dear HR, this is costing you money. It's just you don't see the invoice until it's too late. And for everyone else, this is costing you your mental health. Today, we're going to expose these systems of invisible incentives that are responsible for all this dysfunction, including what would change this kind of behavior nearly overnight.
So you mentioned the withholder, and I know exactly who you're talking about. He was explicitly told what his title was. He wanted a bigger one. He withheld his energy, and he withheld his expertise, and eventually ended up sabotaging the goals of the team.
What was your most specific memory of sabotage?
In meetings, we were all there. We worked together sometimes all day long, working on deep strategy, deep insights work, building, and he would open his laptop and work on stuff that he wanted to do. And so he was very clearly signaling that not only was he not going to participate and meaningfully contribute, but he was also going to dismiss what we were doing. We were there with our EVP and with our COO. Again, a Fortune 100 company, right? And these are very important opportunities to impress leadership with what you're doing, to explain, to show what you're doing, generate buy-in, to get impact or show impact. And he's decided that he wouldn't be bothered to show up, figuratively show up. So he was on his laptop, and our EVP finally clocked it. And she looked at him and said, hey, make sure you're joining the conversation, close your laptop.
Withholding slides, derailing when he didn't get his way. Let's talk about what's underneath it all. We're going to call him Blake versus just saying the withholder the whole time. So for some people, especially high competence technical performers, their sense of self is fused with being the smartest in the room, being the one others rely on, being the special one. When Blake realized that he wasn't in the position he wanted, in the title he wanted, with the responsibilities he wanted, it wasn't, I didn't get the right title. It was, I'm not who I thought I was. And that's destabilizing at a very deep level. And I think that's exactly what we saw. Because Blake knew subconsciously something very important to him. If I'm not elevated, I'm vulnerable. So he reached for the lever, the only lever that he really controlled, which is his expertise. Withholding slides wasn't immaturity. It was an attempt to reassert I think what was indispensability, because that's status insurance. I think he tried to make the team feel his absence.
How early on did you start to realize that it was an emotional play rather than a strategic one, as like you mentioned?
You could see the emotion on his face. You could see that it was important to him on a level that wasn't just professional or surface. It was highly internal and emotionally raw. There were times when he was emotionally volatile, and I think that created a friction that was uncomfortable for us. For him, the friction was supposed to restore leverage. I think that's why sabotage, in a sense, in teams in general, often looks irrational, but it's actually a move to reinsert oneself into being a part of the group in the way that he wanted to be. At the same time, like almost no one ever thinks that when someone's internal psychological needs are unmet, it's going to impact revenue. Like it's going to cost the company millions. And when there are hundreds of Blakes in a 10,000 person Fortune 100 company, the friction in the revenue system might be hidden for a while, but it's significant. More on revenue later. In order to incentivize someone like Blake properly, his self-worth needs to be outsourced. In a system that dismantles people's identities with nothing but status to hang on to feel important, to keep their identity intact, especially someone technical and high competence technical performer like him, it's no wonder that the bigger a company gets, the more likely it is that people are after their own outcomes. Because there are a lot of very ambitious, very high performing, very highly technical overachievers who, all those words are good words, by the way, but the rawness of the emotion behind it for some people makes it so that they cannot manage their own motivations. There needs to be something for them to hang on to. This friction that they create creates revenue leakage because people are distracted with their own goals. Feeling small is very intolerable for someone who built his identity on being exceptional.
That's so well said. I can't tell you how many times I tried to talk to him, understand where he was coming from. And the reality was there was no shared reality. He could not process in his mind that his title wasn't X. I can't even remember what he wanted his title to be. But it was impossible for him to admit. And he went so far as to construct a false narrative in his mind that the company wasn't astute enough to assign him the right titles, and therefore it had to be challenged. And over the course of those conversations, I realized, I'm not talking to someone who's capable of processing this.
When he realized he didn't have the title that he wanted, he was chasing after it very intensely. And that's what's dangerous about companies that make advancement the only visible reward, is they make status the only currency. And when status is the only currency, people will hoard it, even if it costs the company millions. And when advancement is the only reward, or the only visible reward, it also prices individual heroics higher than team amplification. So the withholder, Blake, we call him Blake, the withholder, optimized for being right, being needed, being the smartest in the room, instead of increasing the total system output, instead of collaborating so that the entire puzzle moves forward more intensely. He wanted to move himself more intensely. Now, if he was incentivized on how many people, projects, ideas he augmented with his brilliance, with his technological expertise, 80% for other people, 20% for his own ideas, he would have behaved very differently. Even if he didn't like the people, even if he didn't like the ideas or the projects, now his internal self-worth would be tied to amplifying others. And imagine the magnitude that would have on forward motion and obviously on revenue.
He was a smart guy, but all of it was just so misapplied, and if applied at all. So he really throttled us back, but you're exactly right.
I think he didn't even have to be paid on the amount of projects he supported. If he was clearly told 80% of the things you bring to the table have to be associated with others' ideas, projects, initiatives, and only 20% of your own, then he would seek out augmentation of other people's work that would benefit them because it would benefit him and because it would make him get the reward he wanted, which was, I will be special if I just achieve this. He thought that he could advance by being an individual. And if the incentives changed that he could only advance if he supported others, then he would support others. And that's as simple as that is.
Well said.
Why do you think companies resist measuring interpersonal effects between coworkers, coworker to coworker, coworker to leader, leader to leader? Why do you think they resist going down that route?
All the things we're talking about are highly, highly subjective and hard to measure. So therefore, people default to what they've done in the past.
I think we're definitely stuck in the past, but I think also another reason why companies resist measuring contribution and measuring interpersonal dynamics and creating KPIs that way is because measuring system health is genuinely complex and it's harder than measuring output. And because executives themselves are often rewarded on short-term numbers, individual wins, political positioning, that disease runs upstream. And if the top is rewarded for optics and for numbers, then the layers below will compete for optics and for numbers. Blake, the withholder, Riley, the toxic nice one, and Hunter, the schoolyard bully, are all downstream effects of what's measured and rewarded at the top, which are optics and numbers. And for company leaders and founders who still aren't convinced that this lack of invisible incentives will drive your company to the ground, here's another way to think about things. All three characters were extracting value from the system without adding proportional value back. What did they extract? Blake extracted leverage, Riley extracted safety, Hunter extracted power. None of them were building the machine. They were just feeding on it. They were feeding on this machine of fulfilling their own needs. And that means, by the way, that high performers are doing the cleanup. And when high performers spend 30% of their time cleaning up dysfunction, you are operating at a 70% capacity. Then trust drops, then speed drops. And when speed drops, market share follows. So I think companies don't lose because competitors are brilliant. I think they lose because their internal friction makes brilliance too slow. For everyone else who's listening, you will give your coworkers about a quarter of your life. So before you bow your head and partake in normalizing all this behavior, ask yourself, are these dynamics worth a quarter of your existence? Send us your story or come on the podcast anonymously. Ask for help with your situation. Sponsor the podcast. You can do all those things on notplayingalong.com. And if this episode landed for you, if it named something you've been feeling, please share it. Send it to someone you know, someone in your Slack, your DMs, your executive circle, the people who need to hear it. Because the only way these patterns change is when enough people see them clearly. Next week, we're exposing another one. Until then, keep questioning what's normal. I'm Adri Delore, and this is Not Playing Along.